assigned to one person. In regards, and then likewise, this is sort of a, long first question here. Formal, informal evaluation. Do you have some sort of subcommittee that's in place? And let's just stop there with those two. That's enough, I think. So go ahead, Steve. How are you doing it? I guess that's the question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully, I'm not doing it. My general counsel is.
There you go.
I only have to be involved as little as possible. But really, for us, we started probably almost 3 years ago when the first CGAD started coming out. NAMIC released a white paper on it, and it really just got us thinking as the company continues to grow and expand in all its different states that, this is a great opportunity not to just comply with something that's coming down the pike, but to actually look at our whole corporate governance at the company. So we really started from scratch with the charter, the bylaws, and really build it up from there, and taking a really deep dive into the whole board practices and structure and formation, and really use CGAD as a kind of a template, if you will, not so much to filling it out, but just to leading us to some of the best governance items. So for us, our general counsel, Janaea Thames, runs the process. She did utilize the template that was provided not only by PAMIC but by NAMIC as well, because they have a very similar one, and then started building it out from there. So it is a collaborative standpoint, and I would tell you, if you really, you really need to determine your approach. Are you completing the form and so you can be compliant? Or are you taking it as an opportunity to look at your complete governance? If it's the latter, as we did, it's a much bigger exercise. It will take you way longer than months. It'll take years. It's taken us probably 2 years to fully vet all the ideas and all the practices that we then put in place with our board, and we can speak more to that as we go.
Okay. All right. Eric?
My name is Eric Schmader. Our company is a small shop, so a lot of it's probably going to fall on myself and executive committee to kind of try to steer this. And right now, haven't gone through the template ourselves to create one, but as Steve had mentioned, it's one of those things where we're taking a look at right now some of our corporate governance documents to begin that process. And one in particular is our bylaws. We're one company that hadn't had it updated or reviewed for several years, so it's time for us to start with that first. And we are recently finalizing our latest risk focus examination. So I'm also using that as a way for us to help complete the template. In fact, when we did the prelim survey probably maybe a year and a half ago, many of the questions that are asked in this template or of the CGAD are really things that we've already answered in that prelim survey. So it's one of those things where we're going to be taking that information and probably putting it in the format here of this template. And for us and for my purpose, probably the best way for me to use is either, I downloaded the Indiana's template because I know Joe DeMello said they were going to use that as a form. So also PAMIC's template there as a guide for me to kind of begin that process. So, but it is something we're talking more at the executive committee and at board level. So it's a way, Steve mentioned the approaches, we've got to kind of relook at how we are handling corporate governance, and just to make sure we're in compliance, and just looking down the road and for the future of the company. So.
And Eric, to clarify, when you're talking about the survey, you're talking about the survey that you received in advance of the exam.
Correct.
Correct? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And really, honestly, a lot of those questions, like I said, were addressed there. And when we did that in the prelim survey, there wasn't much additional follow-up from the exam process with the examiners. So, the way I look at it, of course, now that was for the exam. This wasn't for CGAD. They were comfortable with the answers we provided there. So.
Okay. All right. Bob?
Hi, my name is Bob Lyon. I'm president of Rockingham Group in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and we've had the privilege of filing 2 times. So I guess I'm the grizzled veteran on this group. We first filed in June of 2018, and then filed second again in 2019. And we used a combination of a group approach and individual task assignment. So we did get the entire senior management team together. We walked around in circles for the first month until this was before there was a format. So we really walked around in circles trying to figure out what it was we wanted to do and try to get a format. And somewhere along the line, we stumbled across Indiana, and that helped us point us in our direction. That helped marshal efforts. So one of the first things we did was we realized that there was quite a bit of overlap between the risk-based assessment or risk-based audit as was mentioned. So we tasked our accounting staff that had pulled those documents together to pull the documents back up, refresh them, and that gave us a basis for at least starting to pull some of the information together. And we surfed in and out of senior management and staff time on this to assemble the information. One of the challenges, though, as we had different management team members writing different parts of the document, is we then went back and tried to create one voice, because we didn't want the document to sound like it was created by separate people, because it was, but we wanted to have it sound like it was of one voice. So that was somewhat of a challenge, but we got there and got it filed on time.
Okay, very good. Any questions from the audience on any of those comments? No? Okay. Yes.
Bob, did that, going through the process now for 2 years, has it created some change in the governance structure at your shop, or thoughts of changing?
That was question two, Steve.
I didn't look either yet.
How about I lead off with question number 2?
Steve's always trying to take the lead here.
You've just made Scott redundant. Actually, for us, we've traditionally had a very robust corporate governance structure. So much of the practices that we've had in place for us was really just taking the practices that we already were doing and explaining it. To us, it was very much like the ERM process that we were, as I think most everyone here has had some type of maybe informal ERM process, but taking that informal process and documenting it and putting it into a document is a process that takes a amount of time, and it does cause you to think and rethink things, and it's still a learning process. For instance, one of the areas that I sent a text to my assistant, said we need to strengthen our whistleblower. We've talked about that. We've got open door policies. We've got reporting mechanism where we think people can report up the line of things that they see, but I think we need to take the step and say we need a formal whistleblower policy. So even though we filed for 2 years and I think we're happy with our product, there's still things that we can and will improve going forward.
Okay, we can just go down the lines. I guess you're obviously still in the process of developing it, but maybe is there any areas that you can foresee that will cause some change, maybe?
Well, I think it just, as Bob alluded to, we just going to need to document more of it. And honestly, I think we've seen that over the past few years, even just going through our regular audits with our auditors and things like that. I mean, and then coming back to the risk focus exams. I mean, again, it's one of those things, they're asking those questions, and what it keeps going back to, if you're doing these and have some of these processes in place, which again, as a small company we may do, we just don't take the time to document that. So, and again, what I've been careful to tell our management and also the board is, okay, we'll document, but again, if we're documenting, we better be sure we're doing it as well. But so that just comes back down to probably just making some policies in place and just ensuring that we do. Also, what this is going to do is make sure you're revisiting them probably more frequently too.
Right. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, even before CGAD came about or even was an acronym out there, certainly we had areas of the company that we were looking to change from a governance standpoint. When I had some real horror moments when I took over as CEO in 2006, in that, let's see, my vice chairman maintained our entire $300 million investment portfolio in his company. Our 401k was with that same company. He was the vice chair, as I said, and he was the head of the compensation committee that set my salary. So, it was just, some no-brainers right out of the gate. But so we've attacked those over the years. But then even getting into more recent years, it's been more of, how can we best govern the company? So just like ERM, all of us were doing some kind of risk management before ERM came about, but it was just a formalization of the process that actually improved the process in the end. And we find the same thing when we start implementing some of the governance items that we have here. Did we have a succession plan before? Yes. Was it written? No. And what you find is when you go to document those and get them approved by multiple people, everybody had a different opinion of what the informal, undocumented plan was, because now they see it in black and white. So you'll spend a lot of time going over things that you thought was set in stone, although not on paper, because now everybody has an ability to not only restate it, but get their opinion in it. So in the end, you will come to a good process. And I think it is important to note that you don't have to have everything locked tight at the time you provide your CGAD. If you state in a way that says you're going to get there, you have a plan to get there, and this is why we're going to do it, I think that puts you in a very good position on that side. For us, we drafted our CGAD about 3 years ago. We just thought it would be a good exercise to say, hey, if we had to comply with this right now, what would it be? So we started documenting it back then, and that really helped set the stage for us to where we are today. Now it's more of a, just cleaning it up before we have to file ours next year, and that's a good place to be.
Yeah, that's great comments.
If I could add, one of the things on your boards, if you have anybody in the C-suite on your board that doesn't think it's important and just kind of throw it out, I think going through this exercise, what I saw was those who were kind of naysayers really started to view their insurance company as regulated entity and how important it was, and got them on board, and then corporate governance started to improve. So I think it's a way to lay it out in the thought of what your regulators want, going through that exercise and challenging and realizing they really didn't know, what it was, and seeing the importance.
And there's a couple good points. I can't tell you how many times in business I've been in meetings and it's something that's informally in place or not documented, and you go around the room, what's everybody's opinion of what that actually is, or the practice, whatever it may be. Guaranteed every person will have a different opinion of what it actually is. So that's definitely a benefit of going through the documentation process. And it was touched on a couple times there too, as regards to ERM. And that's probably the case for the majority of the folks in the room. ERM very possibly is an informal process that's in place, but it seems like one of the outcomes was formalizing the ERM framework a little bit that came out of this. Okay, going down the line. Steve, do you know the next one? No? Okay. Just kidding. Okay, the next one. How exhaustive did your filing go in regards to critical risk areas? So the last topic, and this is really more for Bob and Steve at this point, but by all means, Eric, if you want to chime in too. So that last area I was presenting, it's only a few questions, but it's sort of wide open in regards to that area. So how far did you go with those risks that you identified in regards to documentation?
For us, it was minimal. I would say it's minimal. Yeah, each one of them, I'd say it's a healthy paragraph, but that's it, because we were concerned that we were going to be duplicative in nature with our ERM. That goes into far more detail as far as the process. So we generally discuss ERM primarily from the standpoint of how the board interacts with management in evaluating those risks. So we don't go and talk about each specific thing, but we say we have dashboards, that goes to the audit committee has the responsibility, and so forth. So that's the key thing that we put into the document. Then we just provide a general overview of how we view each risk and state, for more information, see ERM, and try to keep that very, very consistent. So we felt that was a better way. When I had my Janaea run one of them, I said, just write up what you think one of them would look like, and it came back. It was pages, and I'm like, no, that's way too much detail. She's a lawyer, that's what they do. So, so we're like, let's call it back, let's get it down to what it really is, and that'll really help you, because if you go too far, you're just going to be doing dual effort as well. Every time you modify your ARM, you're going to have to come in here and change your CGAD and remember to do that. So.
Very similar. Our process is very similar to what Steve described at Hartford. We have a robust ERM process. We have a risk register. Out of that risk register, we've identified X number of critical risks that we report to the board, or specifically to the audit committee, and then ultimately to the board, the audit committee in charge of our ERM process. But we did not go through and identify specifically all 42 risks that we have and put it into the CGAD, because that's what our ERM document is for. What we described was the process and the oversight, which committees, who's responsible for the risk, and how we grade that risk register, and the monitoring process. So, we incorporated the ERM by reference, but we did not cut and paste things over because it seemed like a duplicative effort on our side and on the department side.
Eric,
I mean, for us, we probably don't have as in-depth and we're not as complex, but, we do identify our EM items with our rating agency and best. So that's probably, for me, my perspective of what we'll take away from that and point it. And many of those were the items that you had listed on that slide. So
Okay.
we'd address them there at that point.
All right, very good. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Actually, probably Bob, this has to do with Bob more. Now that Virginia has a requirement for you to file, have you actually seen the rating agency saying we want to start seeing your corporate governance annual disclosure and your ERM documents?
Yeah, certainly AM Best, we've been supplying the ERM document for more than several years, probably 5, 6 years, if not longer. We have not had a request for the CGAD document, but the rating cycle prior to last, the questions that we were asked were specifically geared around CGAD.
Okay.
They were asking.
So it's likely that's going to morph.
I would expect, and one of the interesting things, any AM Best folks here? If you could raise your hand, or,
No.
yeah, no, okay. Oh, I think they send test questions out to their analysts. So it wasn't this rating cycle, it was the previous rating cycle. I won't say we got blindsided because we knew all the answers, but we spent about 45 minutes of our rating time talking about how we select board members, how we monitor board members, the rationale for having board members, what's the oversight. So at that point in time, that was really before we started CGAD, and I think it was their scouts out trying to identify what was coming down the pike. And we haven't heard about it since from them.
Well, obviously you did a good job.
It just hasn't come back up yet, so.
Hey, quick follow-up, Bob and Steve. Obviously, two larger companies. You were talking about ERM. Do you guys actually have ERM committees, or is another committee responsible for that?
For us, it's the audit committee.
Audit committee,
So
okay.
my chief financial officer is also my CRO, Karen Mashinsky. So she's in charge of the ERM. We have an internal ERM committee, but she has a direct line around me to the audit committee to be able to report on that. So we felt that was sufficient, but they have the oversight.
Bob?
Ditto, except my CFO is John Schwarfier.
Okay. All right. Very
His
good.
used to be Karen
It used to be Karen. Which maybe explains why we have the same process, but.
All right. Okay. Okay, the next one is more of a detailed question. I think we've touched upon it a little bit earlier in the morning. The question is, how did or will you respond to areas that you feel do not really apply to your company? So I guess we developed these questions weeks ago, but sort of like this morning we were talking about, well, if you don't have it in place, are you going to make a mention that, hey, we're going to put it in place, that type of thing?
For us, there was no section that we had
nothing
to
like
put
that.
do not apply. There's something that kind of reference ORSA, and of course we comment on that, but everything else we at least had some. I think if you leave something blank, you better have a reason why.
I agree.
Again, if you don't have it, just be honest and tell what you're going to do to put it in place. I think that's the most important item.
Yeah, that's fair. Eric?
Like for us, we're not a holding company, so we don't have a nominating and comp committee, so, something like that, we'd probably just state that, and
Right.
honestly, I would probably let them come back to me and say, well, why? And,
Right.
That's what our take would be.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we had any DNRs or did not apply.
Okay.
And I would suggest that if you find yourself with a lot of does not apply, you may want to go back and reevaluate your corporate governance processes, because they tend to be fairly open-ended questions, and frankly, they probably do apply if you give it some more thought. So we may have had one or two where we weren't doing, and I would strongly urge, just, you have to be honest. It's kind of like internal controls. When you review internal controls during an audit, you're not going to have every internal control that's going to be asked about, but you can have countermanding internal controls that will provide an adequate level of control to what you're trying to achieve. So simply so state, or if it is something that you have evaluated and you do need to do, so state, we will be doing X, and then make sure you do X.
I would think for a lot of the members here, you don't have any independent board members perhaps, and how are you going to address that? And I think with Joel, with your comment of what does that mean for the board to be independent and objective, and if they aren't independent because they're consultants or they get a commission or something like that, how are they independent and objective, and why do you think that that's okay? To look at not independent from the definition, but how are they acting independent?
Yeah, and on that measure, make sure you have your potential conflicts of interest procedure and documentation in order. If you just look down into Baltimore and what's going on at the University of Maryland Medical System and the disaster that's happening there, seems to be lots of disasters in Baltimore, by the way. But anyhow, there's just a perfect example of how corporate governance can go wrong, even in a huge organization. So, tighten that up on the potential conflicts. If you have somebody that's non-independent, explain why and what you put in place to control that. How do you review it each year? What's the scope of it? Don't just say that, one of my board members is a lawyer and they do work for, they help in adjusting claims. No, how much, what's it, and what do you think you do to put in place to control that so they don't have influences on the decisions that are made by the company? It's okay to have non-independent, just say why you and how you control it.
Okay, very good. Any questions? No? Okay. The next one, I think this is a good one here. So how did each of you go about or will go about addressing where you have the overlap between senior management, members of management that are also technically board of directors?
Go ahead, Eric.
Well, for me, I'm the only one that put on this. So, but I guess that's where you could go back and say I'm not obviously the chairman of the board as well. So
Okay.
we have a separate chairman, executive committee that I report to, and I guess that's how we delineate that, and even refer back to the bylaws too.
Okay.
Eric, can you speak a little bit more?
Sorry.
Bring it in a little bit closer.
Yeah, it's working. Just get closer.
Sorry.
Get personal.
Sorry. Try to get up close. Just like I said, I'm the only board member that is a member of management that's on the board. So, again, I would state that we have a separate chairman versus I'm not the chairman of the board as well, and also state, we have an executive committee that I report to as well. We meet more frequently, and then also, I guess that's.
Yeah, we only have one management, and that's myself as president. That's a member of the board. We score every board member each year as to whether they're independent, because we do from time to time have board members that in their day jobs we may want to use them for whatever we need to be done. For example, we have a board member that has a construction firm. They had done a bathroom remodel for us. When we rebranded, we have a board member that had a sign company, but what we did, and we use them, we make sure it's an arm's length transaction. We evaluate other vendors. We go to other vendors as appropriate. And we make sure it's an arm's length transaction. So, 100 years ago when I was a fledgling CPA, and I think this has changed somewhat, but the old maxim was you have to be independent both in fact and appearance. So the appearance was as important as the fact that you were independent. You have to appear independent also. Otherwise, no one's going to believe that you are independent. So, we try to take that into account. We make sure that whenever we have a transaction with a board member, it's arm's length. It's in the commercial space, and there's no preference given, and there's no long-term contract that's that's involved. So, at least from our perspective, we think that we take the steps necessary that not only can we justify that our board members are independent, we can show the thought process behind it to identify that they are truly independent board members.
I'm the 10th president at the company in 177 years. I'm the first one that's not the chairman. So if you still have a member of management that's the chair of the board, or the president and CEO also serves in that role, I think that's one of the biggest things you need to have a discussion of separating that from a governance standpoint. That makes, who sets the agenda is what gets talked about at the board meeting. So if that's a member of management, that's, they have full reign of essentially controlling the discussion at the board. I'm the only one on the board, so I don't have anybody additional. I do have 3 non-independent directors. We highlight those. We take independence even beyond the arm's length transaction. If you have any kind of transaction with you are non-independent. You're not independent. So I have a member that runs an association, and I do not belong to his association simply because, and it's a business association, simply because we don't want any kind of connection that could be construed. We may determine that it's non-independent, but the fact is there are other people that have opinions of why and what you do not have. So nothing against what Bob does or anybody does in doing that, but you do need to have that discussion with your board of what does independence mean, and are you going to keep it very, very consistent across the board? So we take that very seriously, and it does create challenges when I have 3 out of 10 board members. And keep in mind, I'm not independent either because I'm a member of management. That takes 40% of my board that can't do certain things where independence is required. So it becomes a challenge sometimes when you have those individuals and you're trying to rotate them around into other positions on the board and chairs and so forth.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go off script here and ask an extra question, but it's an easy one. Because there was a lot of questions that came up at the breaks. Do any of you have an evaluation process, sort of like was discussed earlier this morning, of the directors, whether either a self-evaluation or some sort of evaluation process? Could you touch on that?
I'll start. Right now, we don't have a formal evaluation process, but we've had that conversation because of the CGAD. And we've, like I said, this has been out for a couple of years. We've been talking about this. So even our directors attending PAMIC and NAMIC conventions, I mean, they're seeing this, and we're talking about what we should put in place. So I assume as we go through this process, there'll be some sort of evaluation, and also probably a way for us to help, be more formalized in identifying candidates. And we have one, but it's not formalized, so something like that.
Okay.
We have a formal evaluation process that we complete once a year. It's given to board members on an anonymous basis, even though we can track who's responding. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. You got to figure out who replied and who didn't. But then we put it together and we feed it back to the board, and we look for trends over time in areas that we can spend more time on. One of the areas that we've been trying to work on is elevate the board and make sure they spend their time on strategic issues. And we're trying to go to fewer topics that are deeper and more strategic at the board level, as opposed to shotgunning a bunch of stuff on the agenda that really doesn't add a lot of value to the process.
But Bob, do the board of directors, do they do a self-evaluation, or is it just on the other directors on the board? Is that how yours works?
No, it's both.
Okay.
Like,
both.
are you getting X information? Do you feel is the information valuable to you? Are fellow board members prepared? And then we leave open-ended
Gotcha.
places for responses. Also, I think we use SurveyMonkey to do that.
We have a pretty exhaustive, I think, survey process. I think this is our 4th year that we've had it in place. Each year we refine it just a little bit, we get better at it. So there is an overall board effectiveness that all board members input on. We use SurveyMonkey as well. Then we have a committee evaluation for each one of our 4 committees. So people that sit on the committee evaluate, is the agenda good? Is it run well? Are they prepared? Questions of that nature. members that are not on that committee, though, then evaluate the committee. Are they presenting the correct information back to the board? So is the audit committee doing their duties for everybody that's not on the audit committee? So we go through each one of those four. For the board members, what we decided to do is not do an annual review of all of the members. What we do is we have classes of board members based on their terms. We have 3-year term. We also felt uncomfortable with the way we go about re-electing board members, that it was just, hey, Bob's coming up to the end of his term, he's up again, and we just throw him in front of the policyholders, which of course is the board with the proxies to vote for Bob. So now anyone sitting for election or ending their term, I should say, is evaluated by the entire board. That then has a process, goes back to the governance committee and the chair. They evaluate, then they would sit down with Bob and say, Bob, here's the feedback that you received. Then the governance committee and then board votes to move Bob forward for election. So we kind of tighten that up a little bit through that process, but we do not do an annual review of each board member.
Very good. Very interesting. Okay, the next 2 questions, really one question. So at the end of the day, for Bob and Steve, what did you see as part of going through the process of preparing the CGAD filing that you considered to be the most challenging? Like what, maybe not the most, but what are the couple areas that you felt were really difficult that maybe involved more internal investment time?
For us, the most challenging part, and I think it was touched on this morning, it was actually the first question, was at what level are you reporting for this document? We're a holding company, and how we corporately view ourselves and we govern ourselves is at the total company level as opposed to the operating subsidiaries. However, we have 3 legs to our stool, to our operating stool. One is we have a personal lines division. Second, we have a specialty lines division. And third, we have a commercial lines division. As we have these subsidiaries that continue to develop and grow, our specialty division is much different than our personal lines division, and the corporate somewhere in commercial somewhere in the middle. I can see at some point in time that we will evolve from the governance model at the parent company level, and we'll probably evolve this document into whatever our corporate governance. But it took us some time. I mean, it's something. Obviously, if you just have one company, it's pretty straightforward. As you get multiple companies and different approaches to corporate governance, at least for us, it will not be an automatic answer that we will do it at the holding company or at the parent company level. I can see us evolving over time into some other answer than that.
We have a holding company structure as well. We have two writing companies, soon to be 3, and but different than Bob has it. So they're just different rating structures, all write the same type of business. So we feel we'll be able to maintain at the holding company level and total organization level. From a standpoint of really looking at what the most difficult parts was, I guess if you step back and really think about it, governance is kind of like determining where the new landfill is going to go in the area. Everybody believes we need one, they just don't want one in the backyard, their backyard. And so your board was the same way. Oh, we need governance, we need it, yep, we believe in it. Okay, we got to put these changes. Oh, whoa, let's settle down. Let's not talk about term limits and when you should get off the board and suitability and everything. Let's grandfather everybody in. Right. So you just have to be prepared that you're going to have some pretty frank and open discussions about what's meaningful. And all of a sudden, when you're talking term limits, let's say I can remember this one in the governance committee, and everybody's like, yeah, let's grandfather. I don't know if we need to move forward. And one of my board members said, why do we think we're the best suited to run this company? And I've been on this board for 15, almost going on 20 years. You know, maybe it's time we have somebody else come on the board. How do we bring in fresh, if all of us stay, how do we ever bring in fresh blood? And so you're going to have some pretty heavy stuff to all of a sudden start dealing with when you start bringing up these topics. So Was there any really difficult ones? I would say term limits, definitely, that's a discussion, and I can tell you we're like Congress, we're just kicking the can down the road. We haven't really touched it too much. The suitability of senior management is a tough one to get to, especially as in relation to what the board's duties are. So let's just take a CFO. We can define what their requirements are. You can have a job descriptions, what their qualifications are. But does that mean that, in my case, Karen Mashinsky, who I put in that position, are they suitable just simply because they tick the boxes on a job description? And then, just because I brought them in now and they're suitable, how does the board maintain that they remain suitable? So we have an issue, we've doubled the size of our company in about 7 years. And what we're running into is that certain individuals that were able to run a $120 million organization, they can't handle necessarily a $225 million or $250, and we're going to continue to have that as we grow. And so that's the board's biggest challenge, and that's really almost where I challenge them back of, what are you doing to hold me responsible to make sure that my team is constantly evolving along with the company? But the board struggles with that, and quite frankly, I understand why they struggle with it, because it's mostly dependent on me putting them in front of the board so they can have that, and then putting a process around it. So for us, we have an annual review where I sit down in an executive session with the board and speak to each one of my reports. This is also part of our succession planning standpoint. So it serves that role, but then it also serves the role of why I think this person's doing well, needs to be coached here, developed here, or where we may need a change in the future. So I think just having that process at least meets the need of addressing suitability. And then just comp, that always is a wild card, throwing that hot potato, throwing that one out on the table. And protecting your privacy on comp, I think that's the biggest thing. So you need just enough to put in CGAD, but you don't want so much that it just creates a lot of question. And then the last one, diversity. You are going to have individual, and my prior chairman, he's no longer even on the board now, but my prior chairman, we get the best person, doesn't matter what they look like. Okay, we get that, but we all look like a bunch of old white guys. No offense to the old white guys. You have to change your thinking. If you're only looking where old white guys are at the local club, guess what you're going to get? So you have to start, how do you get involved with your board in telling them, we need to look in different areas. We may have to go down in the city. We may have to look over here. It's the same thing in adding diversity into your company. If you only look at the local community college or college, guess what? You're pretty much going to look like your regular community. It's a tough subject. Nobody wants to talk about them. We all agree it's a good thing to do, but it's going to put things out on the table that are just going to make people uncomfortable. And the biggest thing I would say, don't rush the process. Like I said, it's taken us almost 2.5 years to get where we are with how much we've progressed. If you try to cram this through in 6 months, it's too much change for your board to deal with, and you'll have a lot of upheaval.
Good points.
For me, I guess it's one of those things, it's just starting to having those conversations, as Steve mentioned, and having them with the board where they haven't maybe been used to, because we have board members who've been on there for quite some time with our board. So it's just trying to have that conversation and get them to think and say, okay, we say we do this, but are we really doing it? And then we have to, report on this. So I think that's part of just getting the process started. Like I said, for me, I'll go back to our preliminary survey for me to begin the process with the answers we provide there, and then can see what gaps we have. And again, that's something we have to have at the executive committee meeting level, and then take it to the board. So,
Pretty good. Bob?
I think I'd already addressed.
All right,
Kicked it off.
And the last.
I guess it wasn't very memorable, so.
The last two questions, I'll just combine. Steve's already touched on it a couple times. I think a lot of folks in the room, it's like, well, how long is this going to take? And I think it's at hours here, but we obviously don't need to get that specific. But maybe each of you just talk about time related to this project. And then lastly, which I think is probably the most important question from this, one of the big items, which you've all individually touched upon, What is the, what recommendations do you have for those that have not yet started the process? In regards to probably where to start, where's the best place? Again, you touched on it a little bit, but maybe to conclude with that.
Yeah, real quickly, I mean, if we didn't want to make changes in our governance and we simply needed to complete the form and file it, a month and a half, I mean, just to make sure you've got all the I's dotted and T's crossed, and, you know, I might be a little bit there. Completing the document is not the problem. That's, you know, if you want to make change, that's where your time's going to be. So it just depends. Are you comfortable with what you're putting down there? And if there is something that you're uncomfortable about and not having the answer, we'll get to that, then that's where you'll have to allocate a little bit more time to addressing those particular items on that side. What was that second? What was that last
The
thing?
time, which you've said a couple times, taken years to.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't want to scare anybody. We chose to completely look at every element of our board governance, and that's why it took us as long as it did. Plus, identifying all those areas and saying, you know what, in year one, let's focus on this. In year two, let's focus on this, so we could kind of sprinkle it on the board. Believe me, I didn't start talking about term limit day one, because all of a sudden they wouldn't listen to another word I said. I didn't handle that actually until about 4 months ago. And all of a sudden they were more amenable to it because they realized all the other changes we put in place. And all of a sudden they did that. And we also just made a recent change where every committee chair must be independent. That was huge because it told 3 other individuals, you'll never be a chair of a committee. I couldn't have done that on day one. So think about stage how you want to make the change, but it's really 2 different things. Form's one thing, the change is a complete difference.
Question?
How many people do you have on your board?
10, including me.
Eric?
You know, I guess really for us, like Steve said, for me, it's got to be driven to complete the form probably by myself. But again, what I've seen though with our board over the years, they've been more welcome to have conversation. I mean, we've had to change, you know, with our board members over the years since I've been with the company, and they're willing to have these conversations, asking more relevant and having more input. So I think it's just going to be an ongoing process as we look at this. And we've seen it again from the audits, from the focus exams when they're starting now that talk to your chairman of the board, your audit committee chairperson. So these guys know they've got to be in tune with what's going on and have to be asking relevant questions, especially when your audit committee is meeting with your auditors and having these conversations. So, you know, again, it's just an ongoing process. And I think for us, you know, we're not afraid to probably reach these questions and look at the governance. But again, you're going to have to take your time in doing that. You just can't shove it on them. As far as what recommendation to have, they're not starting, well, I'm in that process right now. I'm not really starting the process. So what I'm doing right now is, like I said, just going back to those corporate governance documents, the bylaws, charters, and things like that. And that's where I'm using that as a starting point and having that conversation with our executive committee. Maybe we need to spend a little bit more time here in this, trying to either refine it or make it better.
Pretty good. Bob, I'm locked in. Not reading ahead.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we have a corporate governance committee that is responsible for this. We have a corporate governance checklist where we have each committee, the responsibilities each quarter of what has to be done. So we were pretty happy from where we were from a corporate governance standpoint, so we didn't really feel the need to go back and review these things. So for us, it was really preparation of the document. So we started about 9 to 12 months in advance. We spent the first month or 2 flailing around because we had no model or no template to go from. We then had about 2 months of intense focus where we really started pulling stuff together. 2 months to edit and review so that it would sound like it was actually a comprehensive and cohesive document as opposed to a bunch of people putting it together. We then put it down for a month and let it ferment. Then we came back to it, reread it, passed it around, let the board take a look at it, let others look at it and see if it hung together. And then we were ready for filing. All in, we probably spent, and this is a wild guess, probably about 150 hours, I'm guessing, all in on it.
Very good.
Yeah, and when I said a month and a half, I mean just to write it. You know, you have a lot of people you have to put in front of, time to get it back, get the edits back, but, you know, just to get the documentation of the words and what you need to present, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's the review process that does.
Right. Lisa, do you have anything, Lisa?
I think with my experience
Questions?
that the company was pretty immature and new in the insurance industry, and they did a full corporate governance review and looked at the whole just to make sure that they were a good regulatory citizen. And then when they had to file, they didn't have the template, they did the first year in Indiana. So I think that filling it out, probably if it took him an hour, I'd say he probably spent more, not quite that, maybe over lunch. And then they said, thank you very much for to do the template, and now it's become a more robust, process. But I think it's a process that continues to evolve, continues to improve and enhance in the way that they're looking at it, as well, which I think is in the spirit of what the regulators are trying to do.
That's great. That's good.
Now, maybe I misunderstood your question. You had asked what recommendations,
Right.
and realizing that I'm staying in between lunch, but I just jotted a couple down. This is mentioned before. Do not cram this thing. It didn't work in college or school. It's not going to work on this thing either. So give yourself plenty of time. Delegate it to your team members, but the senior management voice has to be there so that it has credibility when it hits the department. Reuse your previous work. A lot of this stuff I think you'll find has already been done as you prepare for your risk-based assessment. Be specific in your responses. Don't be vague of, oh yeah, we do that. I mean, specify. This is what we do. This is how we do it. This is why we do it. Use the process to realize that maybe everything you're doing isn't the way it should be, and maybe you can improve your processes, which it sounds like what I've heard from Steve. If you don't do a process, don't make it up. Just so state and say how you're going to change it. And the last one is approach it with a positive frame of mind. I've heard I've got the feeling from individuals that I've talked about this, that they're looking at it as, oh, it's just one more nose of the camel under the tent, as opposed to saying there's a reason why this is being requested, and all you have to do is go back to 2008 and look at corporate failures. This isn't a bad thing. This is not a defensive exercise. This is something that should result in a better organization for you going forward.
Can I just add too about the education? Somebody brought up in between our sessions there about how we do, and we, like I said, again, we're a small company and everybody's time's more valuable. And if you're getting a more evolved board, most of your board members are employed full time. So when you do have a board meeting, you want to get through the materials, and you might not have the time to bring in a session or do an education session there. But we did, and this is, we enrolled all our board members that are interested in like NAMIC's Farm Mutual Director Certification Program. And you don't have to be a NAMIC member to be enrolled in that. You might, but what we do is, again, because their time's valuable, they can earn those credits, and you get transcripts from them of the sessions they attended or what they saw, and a lot of them all did it via webinar. So again, they did it on their own time, and again, we obviously paid or reimbursed for their time to watch those. But again, that's something we shared with our insurance department. Again, telling them how we keep our directors informed and educated. So that was just something I just wanted to throw out there. It's not that expensive, and again, it's keeping the board members informed.
Great.
Yeah, I real quick, get involved with your board chair immediately. Remember, he or she is going to be the one that drives it down to the rest of the board. So if they're not on board, nobody else will be. So they need to understand what you're trying to accomplish, what you're not trying to accomplish, why CGAD's there. Get commitment from them, because they're ultimately, when you walk out and they're left in executive session, that's the person that's going to be championing the board to get this done.
That's great. Ron?
One last question for me, and I know honesty and this question standing between lunch and heading home. Bob, you're the only one that had to actually submit it to a governmental agency, correct? Had you received any feedback on your initial filings? What were some of those comments? And what about how did your second filing differ from your first filing?
Right. The answer is no. We have not gotten any feedback from the state of Virginia. We are in the midst of a financial exam, which came roughly a year after. It's not apparent to us that there was any overlap between the financial exam and the CGAD that we filed. And, that's only one data point, but no feedback, which means that we either did such a tremendous job that there's no questions, or we did such a horrible job that they're still compiling their questions. So, don't know yet at this point. Our second go-round, we went through, not to the level that we did the first time because the document was prepared, but it was a similar process that we went through and we evaluated every area to make sure that if there was any changes, the state asked for a red line version of where we made those changes. We had a couple, we saw some things we could improve, and there was a couple places where maybe we changed our process, so we so noted, but that was a fraction of the time compared to the first go-round.
Okay, Bob, Eric, Steve, thank you very much for participating.